Good to go.
Okay, good. Give Keith another minute or two.
Charlie's still relishing on that Bills win yesterday.
Yeah, I'm sure he is.
I think he knew that I left my notebook downstairs with my notes, so I appreciate his.
He did at one point mention he might be a little late. I don't know if he got where he was getting to.
He says he's trying to log in. So.
All right, I gave host back to Village of Trumansburg, so it should show up there.
Okay. Sounds like Keith is stuck in a perpetual update of some kind. Software Monday. Okay, well, he's stuck in an update loop, so we're going to start the recording. Okay, so I will call to order this regular December monthly meeting of the Village of Trumansburg Board of Trustees. All trustees are present, minus Trustee Hannon, who is having some software issues and is attempting to log in as we speak, but doesn't want to hold up the show. Made a couple of, or at least one significant, for anyone keeping score at home, one significant agenda change in the interest of time, and so that we can dedicate appropriate time to topics of conversation and discussion. We're going to implement what many boards are doing these days, which is the use of a consent agenda earlier in the regular agenda. The consent agenda will consist of items that have been disseminated to the board for review. If there's anything that anyone on the board wants to discuss, then we pull it from the consent agenda. Otherwise, these are routine items that we can approve all at once. So with that in mind, item number 2 on the agenda is, are there any changes to the agenda? I know we have some additions. Under new business, we'll be adding an email and some information on community choice aggregation with respect to energy supply. There's also a letter from the Tompkins Historical Commission, which I'll go over when we get to that point. And we have a request from Tom Myers to revisit building permits and fees. Are there any other additions to the agenda or anything that any trustee would like to pull from the consent agenda? Okay, well, hearing none, then we will move on to item number 3, which is our first public comment period. And I see some attendees who are here for specific purposes, I think, but if there's anything not attached to their reason for being here that they would like to make a public comment, now is a good time. Okay, then if there's nothing from those handful of folks other than their other purposes for being here, we will move right along to item number 4, which is reports from representatives. And I see Ann Corman from the county and Mark Devakaitis from the town. Whichever one of you would like to go first, please jump right in.
Mark, do you mind going first?
No. I don't
Thanks.
have much. Nothing that anybody needed me to pass along too much. I did want to mention thank you to the village for getting the snowflakes up on the light posts. I had some constituents asking me about that, so it's glad to see those go up. In regards to the blue food sharing cabinet over by the Colonial Laundromat, we got permission to potentially try to heat the cabinet if we do go into the sort of single digit nights for a long stretch. Been able to get permission to run an extension cord, and it would not run across anywhere where anyone would walk. So it would kind of start behind the back door, kind of curve around and then run down by the creek. And we put a little chicken heating pad inside. And that would be something we would sort of plug in the evening and then unplug first thing in the morning. So I'm hoping that might be ready to go at the end of this week or next week as we start getting into some colder weather. If anybody has any questions or concerns about that, please let me know. See, not too much else. At the town hall, we're in the midst of planning some audiovisual updates, so we'll be able to, if and when we go back to in-person meetings, be able to have sort of a hybrid situation of in-person and remote participation. So that's somewhat exciting. And you guys, is everybody up to date on the rec program stuff that's been going on in 7th, 8th grade programs? Thought there might be people who have more intimate knowledge of that than me. If anybody wants to know more about the latest, there's a good update in the town email that went out at the end of last week, and I could forward that along to folks. I'm not, without having it in front of me, I don't quite know the details, but I know that's somebody here who's already up on that, Ben. Mm-hmm. Maybe so.
Yeah, that'll be part of my report. Yeah, but feel free to share anything that you'd like to, Mark.
No, I figured you were on that, so that's just the other thing that came to mind. But yeah, I'm kind of winding down the year, and this will be my last meeting as the official liaison from the town. So I'll be stepping down from the town board after this month, but I will be stepping up into the Environmental Management Council representative role. So perhaps I'll attend and give reports on that as is appropriate. That's about it for me.
Well, great. Thanks, Mark. Appreciate it. Appreciate your time that you've been able to give us over the last few months. Any questions for Mark? Okay. Ann.
Thanks, Warden. I'll start with the biggest topic lately for the county these days, of course, continues to be the COVID pandemic, and the stats right now as far as active cases, we have 308 active cases, which is about double from this time last month. We have 8 hospitalizations right now, which is down. It was at 10, I believe, the other day. And since I talked to you guys last, we had only had 1 death in the county, and now we have 6, unfortunately. And the 5 additional people who passed away because of COVID were at Oak Hill Manor, and you may have heard some of this in the news, but they have a severe outbreak among staff and residents there right now, unfortunately. So the vaccine that's coming, I don't know if we have gotten any vaccine doses yet, but we expect 4,500 in the southern tier, and which is not that much, but of course that's going to go towards healthcare providers and people in long-term care situations like nursing homes. And hopefully we'll be getting more and more each week. And we have a pretty good program coordinated with the hospital in Cornell, because as you've probably heard too on the news, that the Pfizer vaccine has to be kept at a very low temperature, but we do have coordinated deep freezers at a couple different locations for that. And the uptick, of course, has to mostly do, we estimate about 75% of the new cases have to do with people having gatherings, and whether at bars or in their homes. So, and around this area, we believe it's mostly, we've been finding in homes or other small places that people might be trying to gather. And as talking to a lot of the different people who are tracking this, they're saying people say, well, I'm fine, so I can just hang out with my family because they're all fine, so I'm not going to catch anything. And then, just like you see on the news, it's one person who doesn't know they have it. They wind up infecting everybody or nearly everybody that they hang out with for an hour or two. So just, of course, we're keeping vigilant about that and asking people to please try to decide on other holiday gatherings. Now, of course, this county, has done better than any county in the state. I think last I looked, we were like 0.5% with our testing that were positive. And so our incident is really, really low, but I'm always asking people to stay vigilant. And, but I don't want to forget to thank everybody for everything that they are doing, because it's really helping everything that, if you're keeping distance, you're wearing a mask, or you're saying, hey, I'm just going to stay home with my immediate family this year for whatever holiday you celebrate. So it really does make a difference. You go not too far out of this county and you can go into a store and there might be some people in there without a mask, and that really doesn't have to happen around here. Let's see, we have some different things here. Do you guys want the sales tax number for October?
Please.
Okay, for the county, it was overall up down 10.69% from last year, which is less of a decrease than prior months, and down for the year to date 11.88%. The smaller municipalities was less of an impact for some reason. This past month it was only down 1.36%, and year to date minus 8.52%. And at the Ulysses meeting, they had said that they actually were all caught up for the year on their sales tax. So that's good to know. And of course, encouraging people to buy local, do curbside. Most every store has curbside pickup. And so, of course, I know you guys are really good about that, reminding people to buy local. So I appreciate that. The tomorrow night at the legislature, we're voting on whether to change the number of legislators on the Industrial Development Agency from 4 legislators down to 3, and instead add someone from organized labor onto that. And that's something that I've been pushing for a long time. So, of course, I'm hoping that passes. But if you have input one way or the other, feel free to contact me, or you can contact our legislative clerk, Kathy Covert, and she can send a message to all the legislators. We are also going to be voting, actually, I think it might be tomorrow, our legislative salaries, but either way, I can tell you about that. We haven't had a raise in 4 years, and we're going to put off for 2 more years getting a raise, and that then the years 3 and 4 to raise our salaries 3% each of those 2 years. But knowing that, of course, we're going to know much more about the economy then, so we could always change it and have less of a raise if we're still having a serious economic impact at that point. Let me just see. We've been doing, the county has been doing a lot with the reimagining public safety, as I know you guys are, and there's a lot of information. We have a website now about that can keep everybody up to date. We also had a town hall last Wednesday regarding updates on everything that's going on, and that you can see on our Tompkins County YouTube channel. And I think that's about it.
Okay, great. Thanks. And any questions for Ann from anyone?
And I need a haircut, but, trying not to go out a lot.
Sorry, Ann, what did you say?
I said I need a haircut. I'm trying not to go out a whole lot.
It looks great. It goes so well with your background. Keep it up. But I think that I just wanted to give special thanks for the extra effort that you're putting in through all of this and positive attitude. And I'm sure that anyone listening or listening to this later will appreciate that the Ledge is putting off an increase for another 2 years in their pay rate. It should be acknowledged, I think. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any additional questions or comments for Ann? Okay, well, thank you, Ann.
One more thing I
yeah.
forgot to mention, that Anna Kellis, that will be her last meeting for this legislature tomorrow. And then so she'll be starting in January at the State Assembly. And there'll be a special election in a couple of months to fill her seat. So that'll be vacant for a couple of months.
Okay. Good, thank you. Moving on to item number 5 on our agenda tonight is our consent agenda, which includes, and I'll read these off and explain very quickly what they are. Again, if needs be for discussion, we can remove any of these items and move them off the consent agenda if we do need to discuss them. We have approval of our minutes from our November 9th, 2020 meeting. We have an engagement letter with the village attorney, Thaler & Thaler, for 2021 for next year. No change in Guy Crow's rates to the village for next year. He has promised to change them in 2022, but not changing them for next year. We have a slate of new members to the Trumansburg Fire Company, which does require village approval. We have a slate of fire company members who are approved to drive village-owned vehicles, which requires board approval. And then in non-written format, we will just be authorizing me to sign fire and EMS contracts with the 3 towns with which we do contract for those services, authorizing me to sign those as they come in. I think we have a couple already. The rest will come trickling in between now and mid-January. So if there isn't the need to remove any of those items, I would entertain a motion to accept the items contained in the consent agenda for this evening.
So moved.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor of adopting the consent agenda as presented, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Great. Moving on to item number 6, we have our board member reports. I'll lead off and simply say that we are late in announcing this, and we are actually not going to be announcing it tonight, but we will be awarding the 2020 Thomas L. Ferretti Community Award later this week or early next week. For obvious reasons, with respect to COVID and everything else, we will be doing it in a private ceremony. We will simply present the award to the winner, and then we will announce it through social media. And then at next month's board meeting, I will repeat for the record who the winner is. We continue to work through our meeting schedule for the various police reform meetings. We have now had 2 meetings with members of the community. Our next meeting is going to be in early to mid-January and is going to consist primarily of local elected officials from either the town board or the school board, as well as administration from both of those, members of the business community, members of the not-for-profit community, and local organizations. So that sounds like it could be a very large group, but so far we've only had a handful of interested individuals from those various groups. So if it gets large, and unwieldy, we'll probably break that up into a couple of different meetings. But as it stands, I'm expecting it to be somewhere in the dozen, probably 10 to 15 range or less. And we will conduct that meeting via Zoom, as we have the last couple of meetings. And it'll be similar in format. We'll go over kind of the purpose of this reform discussion as per the governor's executive order. We'll go over some history of the village's police department. We will have Chief Nelson speak to kind of his approach and philosophy to running a police department and community policing. And then we will entertain suggestions, comments, and questions from the attendees. And then the last item for me is that in January, and Matt, since you're here, sometime in January, I will be scheduling what I'm going to call it's partly a department review, not really an employee review per se, but it's a kind of a department review and 2021 goal setting kind of meeting, based on all of our availability. I'd like to have the meeting with myself and whichever trustee is responsible for that department, and then the department head. And it'll basically just look at what we anticipate is coming down the pike for 2021 in terms of projects and the like. We'll also kind of get a sense, or I will have a better sense by mid-January where we are budget-wise. So we'll know whether we're on track for the spending that we had set in motion in June. Where we are, the sales tax numbers are a little better than expected, but we'll have a pretty good sense of whether we're going to be, or whether we're on track to be under budget or over budget, and if there are adjustments that need to be made accordingly. I will just mention, I guess now, rather than saving it for later, in the Dropbox, there is a letter. The item, it's a PDF that just says Historical Commission. This came in a couple of weeks ago, and it slipped through the cracks on my end. But the Tompkins County Historical Commission last month in November voted to offer a couple of municipalities, the village of Trumansburg being one, a street sign for Cuga Street in the Cuga language. It looks like Village of Groton and City of Ithaca also have Cuga streets, which are receiving a similar offer. The commission is willing to, or will pay for the creation of one sign and the brackets needed to attach it to an existing post. And we just have to determine where on Cuga Street, assuming, and I am assuming for the moment, assuming that the village wants to accept this gift, shouldn't use the word gift, accept this from the County Historical Commission. We have to decide where on Cuga Street we would like to see this sign in the native Cuga language placed. I don't know if anyone has any input on that tonight. Certainly we don't have to decide in a board meeting setting, but sometime over the next couple of weeks, and if you have input tonight, please share it. If not, then if you want to take a walk or a drive up Cuga Street, I'm thinking somewhere from where Cuga Street wise off of Union, all the way to Lake. We'd have to decide where is a good spot, good visibility, signpost. I don't have a strong opinion about where's the best location for that, but we would need to decide that.
I'll just jump in since that is, my driveway.
Right.
I had imagined it just going on the road sign post that's right between Congress and Cuga. I think that's the most visible spot. I mean, anyone seeing it and going to that side of town, or anyone driving in would see it. Anyone walking, to me, that's the logical choice. But to be honest with you, I hadn't thought of putting it on a non-street sign location. Were you imagining more of like a historical marker type of setting?
I mean, that's one option. We would have to locate it and install it. The county has it in mind that it would go on a street sign. And in fact, I think based on the diagram, it essentially is a street sign shaped and sized sign. So we would just attach it appropriately. We might have to, and I don't recall at that intersection, is Cuga on top or bottom? Or does it flag left and right? I think it flags left and right, Congress left and Hugo right.
I want to say that they're stacked, but I honestly, I couldn't swear either way.
I mean, that's a
So,
drill and a bolt. So,
There's a Google Street View of this. Cuga's on the bottom, and it runs parallel with Cuga Street. That's what you're looking
Yeah.
for.
So I'm guessing that would actually work really easily just to put this right underneath it.
Yeah, or it could stack on top. It'd be like Cuga and then cross street and then the new sign. Either way would be fine.
So I see,
So
I see in the Dropbox, and I see the letter now. Is that the color that it is, we think?
no, this is a black and white scan.
So that, I don't know, I think it's kind of significant. Street signs, as we all age, are more or less difficult to understand. And so I think it would be important to know exactly what it looks like before we can determine precise placement.
I think the dimensions and what you see in the letter are what it looks like. I think and I can certainly confirm, I think the coloring would be green and white. And I can certainly confirm they will need a letter of support for the project from me in order for us to receive the sign.
I think we should get the sign.
Yes, agreed.
Yeah, I think that's great. Definitely.
I just put a screenshot of the sign there in the Dropbox if it's syncing fast enough and people want to look at it.
Okay. Well, if anyone has any input on this between now and when I A, confirm the color of the street sign, and B, actually write the letter, certainly just send it off to me. And that's all I have for my report, unless anyone has questions for me about any of those items. And you can certainly ask those questions at any time. So in the meantime, we will move on to fire and Trumansburg Area Chamber of Commerce. Jessica.
We lost her.
Oh, here she is. We lost you for a second, Jess.
Sorry, too many open screens and I clicked the wrong thing to X out of. I apologize.
It's okay. You are up as far as fire and TACC.
Great. So in the Dropbox, there are 3 documents. And before we get to that, one is the village calls and the other the town calls. And we can certainly go over that. In fact, why don't I? But you can all see that there, and everyone can tell me if my file naming is super annoying in an email later, but I like that it's associated with the agenda. I feel like it's easier to access. So you can see this is for November fire. Do I have to read this all out, Roden, or can people just refer to it and it's part of public? Is this something people like to hear?
You do not have to read anything you don't want to.
Okay. I mean, it's all right there, and maybe the numbers are really important, but it shows that the fire department is really important. And here's another thing that's really important about it is getting them the right equipment. And I see that Matt Taylor is on with us as well. And so what I would like to draw your attention to most is in the Dropbox, the equipment thing. And Roden, are you able to call that up? I think it's 6B2.
Yeah, I'm pulling it up now.
So this is the recognition that we have this really great problem of a lot of new volunteers. And without putting words into anyone's mouth, what happens traditionally, which you probably all know, is people who've been on the department for a long time, their gear gets shifted downward to the new arrivals, and the people who've been there for a long time get new gear. But the new arrivals are coming in different shapes and sizes. And so that won't work. Matt, I can't see your face, but I hope you're smiling. I think I presented that diplomatically. So we need to get some new gear, and it all fits within the budget, leaving plenty left. I think something like 5,000 left to see through May in the equipment budget. And Matt, maybe you can speak now. I can't see if you're here. Felt like that was plenty to get through, and he needs the village approval to make this expenditure.
Matt, anything you want to add to that?
No, I reiterate what Jessica's saying. It's a good problem to have. People showing up at your front door wanting to volunteer. It's just a culmination. One thing that I explained to Jessica is the last time we bought a major amount of gear was with a grant, and that's one of the cycles with grant is it's only good for 10 years. So you might buy 60 sets of interior gear, but after 10 years, all 60 sets go bad, basically. So, we've been buying it year after year, five sets. Is the way Jason set it up. That's the way we had it. We've gotten 3 new members that are all Ithaca firefighters, all female. And so we don't really have any gear that fits them. So this gear is really slated for those folks that are coming in and helping us out. So I don't have anything else to add.
Great.
So I guess we need a motion to approve this expenditure.
Yes. Would you like to make that motion?
A motion that we approve the expenditures listed in item 6B2 for the fire department Halo quote.
I'll second.
A motion and a second. I'll just add a friendly amendment to that if you'll accept it, that we are going to spend up to the amount of $7,166 for that purchase.
Thank you.
I have a question. Is this there is a turnout budget line, or are we taking this from a reserve?
It's coming out of the gear budget line.
Oh, okay. Because I mean, generally that just needs your commissioners, but okay. Just wanted to make sure it wasn't a resolution.
No, it's the dollar amount that we have to approve. It's over.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments or questions? All right, hearing none, then all in favor of this expenditure, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thanks, Matt.
Okay, now the fun update.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. You can stay in case I forget any fun stuff. So the new truck, Matt reports, is doing great and it's fully serviced. The grant that was submitted and approved is moving forward, but he's got paperwork on that. So it was a matching grant. And what's significant for us to remember is that the fire department and company continue to earn their own money if they can or get gifts. And along those lines, there's been really great feedback on the Letters to Santa program. And I think especially in this year where all those sorts of things are up in the air, and not that I would have ever seen, in case we have little listeners, what an actual letter to Santa would look like, because it goes straight there. It was really wonderful to know that people were getting served in this way. And so I think gratitude for the fire company, and another example of how it's protecting our homes in lots of different ways. And I think that's it. There's something to keep on the horizon, that there's going to be some culvert work on 96 that's coming up that Matt had just gotten the notice of it when I spoke with him earlier in the week. And so that's not something that's slated to happen until July. And so I'm sure we'll hear more about that, but just being cognizant that that's coming this summer, and how traffic will get routed will be significant. Does anyone have any specific fire questions that I might not have covered? Okay, so the Trumansburg Area Chamber of Commerce, I attended their meeting, which is the first meeting they made last week. They are in a holding pattern and a regrouping pattern, which is where they have been. I offered to reach out to the Tompkins Area Chamber of Commerce, because they have sort of lost their contact with that liaison, and see what we might be able to get from them in this time of regrouping, as they figure out where they want to head. They are doing a local business lighting competition, which is just for bragging rights. And I think Jesse from Little Venice has a trophy. There was some talk of thinking if there could be a residential fundraising event of a lighting activity with a judge, and a 50-50 prize award to go to the chamber and to a local resident with an entry fee. But I haven't heard any more about that. And I think that might be something that's saved for a different time, this being December 14th. So that's all I have.
Great. Any comments or questions for Jessica? I'll just add a couple things very quickly. I had forgotten to mention under my report, speaking of fundraising, I had a lot of fun. The boys and I had a lot of fun on Saturday helping the gem shop. I was hoping Karen Powers would be here tonight, but helping the gem shop draw their raffle prizes. For those who may not remember, the gem shop had bought 40 $50 gift certificates from various local businesses. So quick math, that's $2,000 that the gem shop shelled out. And they were selling raffle tickets for only $2 a piece. They had, by my estimation, close to 4,000 raffle tickets sold. We drew the names of the winners on Saturday morning, and the net proceeds that they were donating to the Teaburg Food Pantry were over $1,600 that they raised. So it was a tremendous effort, and certainly applaud them for doing that. And then back to fire for a moment. You know, when I look at a expenditure like this, the fact that our volunteer, you know, we're picking up volunteers. I've had probably a half a dozen meetings in the last few months with various agencies, primarily in the county. TCOG has a subcommittee for emergency services, but we've also had meetings with folks from outside. And the state of the fire services, the volunteer fire services primarily, around the state is really not encouraging. And so when I see how well our department is doing, the fact that we are not only able to recruit volunteers, but able to retain them, able to get them the kind of training that they need for the eventualities that they may face. I think sometimes it can be a little bit of it can sound cliche, but we're really fortunate to have the department that we do here. I mean, the stories I'm hearing from around the state about departments, they're just evaporating. And the ones that are able to staff, their average ages are increasing by a lot. You know, I think the average age of a lot of fire companies in central New York is probably in the late 50s to early 60s range, whereas our average age of the fire company is declining, which is a good thing. So that certainly speaks to fire company leadership. Appreciate all the work you do, Matt, and everyone in the company for not just volunteering and showing up, but putting in the effort to make it a company that other people want to show up for.
Thanks, Gordon. One thing I do want to mention, since we're talking about donations, so on Saturday, the new Redemption Center down where Independent Fitness used to be, with Tony Elmore and Elmore Enterprises, or whatever he calls that business of his, did a can drive, and they accomplished raising $1,300 with cans and some matching grants. And the folks that own the Redemption Center put some money in that goes directly to Letters to Santa. So there is a lot of community support, not just for the fire company, but I think it's an attribution to the community in general, that how willing people are to give any way they can, you know, and I think we see it all the time. So it's just another example.
That's great.
Which reminds me, thank you. I'm sorry, I got a little thrown off my game, I must admit, when I locked myself out of my own meeting. That I wanted to mention that a constituent contacted me to ask how they could donate online to the fire department and the fire company after receiving a very wonderful update from the town newsletter. And so Matt, I think, was working to pass that information to Tim. And so am I, actually. Now that I say that, I think it's on me to send that email. And I'm not sure what they have, but people really are wanting to participate. And I think that we're seeing a rise in volunteer work because it's great training that's happening, right? This is still going on during COVID times, and there's some safe camaraderie that can happen, and it's a good company. And also I want to note that Matt has put in some serious due diligence to get the reporting cycle to the town. And anyone else who's asked, I don't know that you've had specific requests, Matt, from any other municipalities, but has gone an extra distance to make sure that the town clerk has what she needs in the format that she appreciates, which was brought up at last department meeting. So thanks, Matt. Sorry, I didn't read the reports. They're really important. Please keep sending them. Thank you.
Okay. If there's nothing else on fire, then we will move on to EMS, youth, and street tree. Ben.
So I'll start with the tree board, which is to say that our next meeting is next week. So I have nothing to report on that front, although I do, in a sort of bizarre twist, have a piece for executive session that relates to trees, which is just fun and exciting. For the youth commission, as Mark mentioned, there is news the 7th and 8th grade sort of outside of school extra programming program will begin January 4th. It will be indoors at the Legion. I believe Rorden played at least some part in making that connection. So thank you, Rorden. It's really exciting. It felt sort of on a knife's edge for a little while there. So it was a great thing to see that come through. They will also be restarting school programming. So I know I've mentioned Ethan Crampton, who's the program manager that the youth commission oversees, and he will be resuming programming. It will be a mix of in-person and remote. So it will be really interesting to see how that plays out over the next few months, especially as school kind of goes in and out. So that will be an interesting challenge. It's certainly been, I mean, obviously a strange time to be involved in anything, but youth programming and sort of school adjacent programming of any kind, it's been a very strange time. And I've been really, really impressed with Will Glenn and the new recreation director, and also Ethan, who's the program manager. Moving on to EMS, we had 22 calls in the village, which is out of 84 district-wide. So that's about 26%, which still puts us a little bit higher than our normal average. I think we're 27% for the year. So we are kind of creeping up. And we should be ready to start EMS charts, the new program that we approved in the beginning of January, first week or so of January. So that hopefully for our next meeting, maybe the February meeting, we'll have a new kind of report that I'll be able to share that, yeah, hopefully goes into a little bit more detail and can start answering some of the questions that I know Rorden and I have, and I assume everyone has. But that's about it. So any questions? Oh, and I do have a potential hire that I'd like to discuss in an executive session as well. So we can talk more about that.
I do have one thing to add to the EMS conversation, and that is, and this is again something to start talking about tonight, but I don't want to just kind of leave it open-ended. We have in the past, so I guess brief history lesson, when we began billing for EMS service, I believe that was 2011 was the first full year where we had that. The law requires that the municipality who is contracting for the billing adopt their own billing policies. There was a significant amount of concern at the time with respect to would the potential for an ambulance user, would the potential that they would receive a bill in any way affect their likelihood to call the ambulance. I have to say that I have recently had firsthand experience with that for the first time in my life. And let me tell you that when you need an ambulance, there's little reluctance to dial those 3 numbers if it's dire enough. But that said, we created policies which went out of their way to make sure that there would only be any type of bill sent to a patient who was transported to the hospital via the ambulance. So the kind of the fall assist, lift assist kind of calls we get, that those wouldn't be in any way negatively affected. And we also, as part of those policies, enacted what we would call, or what the term is, a soft billing approach. So the billing company that does the billing for us is instructed by law, they have to send a bill to everyone who should receive one. That includes folks who don't have commercial insurance or Medicare or Medicaid. but then there should not be any process to forcibly collect from those folks who don't pay. And that's fine. Well, the question that I think this board needs to give some serious consideration to is the non-transport medical care situations. Have not had very good statistics, and that's one of the things I'm hoping EMS charts will be able to do for us. Have not been able to have very good statistics on how often that happens, but it's not never. And it seems to be more often than not, where essentially there's a 911 call for an ambulance service, ambulance shows up, and then for whatever reason, the patient signs off on transport. Essentially, if they're conscious, I think with maybe a couple of exceptions where law enforcement might be involved, if they're conscious and there's no law enforcement situation, the ambulance can't force the person to go to the hospital. And I have from November a particular situation that I saw come through in the notification, and then I asked Chris about it, and it was, excuse me, it was a situation where there was an overdose. The call was for an overdose. The patient was unconscious and not breathing when ALS showed up. ALS did CPR, administered an IV, did an EKG, and administered Narcan. They did get the unconscious individual back, and then the person refused transport. So there's actual provision of medical care going on in that situation, and no one's being billed. So we have mileage to and from. We have obviously the time, the payroll of the ALS providers. We have the medical performance of duties and administering of an expensive medication in the form of Narcan. So I would like this board to give serious consideration, and maybe there's very little to discuss, or maybe we want to think about it, to expanding, and it'll take a slight rewrite of our policies, but expanding the situations under which a bill will go out. Whether or not there's any payment for that bill kind of depends on the situation. I'm aware of other situations from, allergic reaction to bee stings all the way up to this type of situation where medical, the definition of medical care was rendered, but no ambulance transport took place. And I think, unless anyone can convince me otherwise, that if we are operating a paid service and we're billing, then we should be billing. And kind of arbitrarily saying, well, if you don't get on the ambulance, then we are not going to charge your insurance company. But if you stay off the ambulance, or rather, if you get on the ambulance, we are going to charge your insurance company. But if you don't get on the ambulance, we're not. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So I'm interested in anyone's thoughts at the moment, but then also there's a larger decision to be made on this.
So I'll jump in, and my apologies. I thought that was under new business, but in addition to what Roden said, I just wanted to point out, we do have a survey of other agencies and what they charge and the various fees that they have in place. So it's in addition to what they call treat and release, there's a number of other fees that I just thought I would mention, just so that we can get an idea for the scope. Obviously, these are not, I don't share these for the sake of peer pressure. There's no like everyone else is doing it going on here, just so we have an idea of the scope. But so in addition to treat and release, there's also specifically motor vehicle accident treat and release. And then motor vehicle accident treat and release can also be distinguished as BLS or ALS, so depending on the type of care. So that's a situation similar to what Roden was mentioning as far as severity goes, where the care rendered may be quite extensive, but then not justify transport. And then you can also have fees, or at least other agencies do, that are a fee for an out-of-district charge. So if we are out on a mutual aid call or something along those lines, then there would be a separate fee. There can also be fees for lift assists, for bariatric patients, for EpiPens, for specific types of medicine. And then one that Chris and I have been doing a lot of talking about lately is a specialty care transport fee. So you all will remember me bringing up the possibility of doing COVID-specific transports, which is something that was never really relevant because some of the surrounding agencies had always done that, and we never had the need or the staff to do it. But as Bangs has become more and more taxed of late, and some of the other surrounding agencies as well, we have been asked to do more and more transports. And that's something that at this point, I believe I mentioned actually in last meeting that Chris is putting together sort of a rough budget and a plan to do more of that, to step into that space, I think a little stronger. But it's something that we can do at this point. We've done a couple transports. None of them have been COVID, thankfully, but our willingness to step in has led to some of the hospitals calling us and asking us to take on that role. So if we want to add that piece to our service, it becomes a little bit tricky as far as how we balance the budget with the towns that we contract with, and all of those things get a little hairy. But for this discussion, it's important because if we wanted to even contemplate doing that, we would need to set up a fee schedule for it. So that's the scope of the conversation, or at least part of it, in addition to what Rorden had already mentioned. And to me, I think Chris and I have some sort of preliminary suggestions that I would be happy to share, but I would really like to hear others' thoughts before I sort of put ours out there, if you have any.
So I feel like personally, I'd love to look at more kind of information, data, and kind of comparisons to other places kind of personally and digest it. But I will say my kind of default stance in these situations is typically to look for, to bill for the service provided. I see where we started and wanting to continue with the essence of kind of a volunteer service and support that we provided as a volunteer crew, in years past. But I think we've very much changed from that. And, if we're not charging in some particular place, then that's coming out of tax dollars, right? So it's like, it's not that we're not charging. Someone's always getting charged, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Like, it's a matter of, is it the patient who's actually requiring or requesting the service, or is it the community on their behalf, essentially? And so that's kind of the way I look at it. And I think in general, I'm in favor of the person using the service. In this case, is the person who at least should be billed. And then I think we can have a different conversation about how aggressively go after that. And I think I'm more in favor of leaning back on that, but at least letting people know, this is a service, and this is how much it costs. And there's going to be some swath of that that's going to pass it on to healthcare insurance, and we stand to recoup some of that pretty easily. So it's kind of seems like there's some easy money to bring in on that front, which I think is important as we look at $1 million budget, for our EMS. And then we can have the conversation about, folks who are unable to, and it seems like we're in a position to be generous in that place, which I think is good.
Good. Jessica or Keith, have anything to add?
I just have a lot of things I'm thinking about, but I can ask questions later.
Okay. Yeah, I think kind of rough numbers. This is from a couple of years ago, but if we use the round number of 1,000 calls a year, I think 600 and change, a little over 60% are currently billable. So it's in that other 35-ish% where some of these other, what I'm calling medical, the provision of medical care is occurring. And I don't know how large that is. And that's something that I've always wanted to get a better handle on. Is it 5%? Is it 50 out of 100? That would seem like even a small number like that would seem like it would be worth pursuing. So that's maybe Ben Carver, maybe that's something that we can have Chris actually put together, or maybe you're already working on it as kind of a spell out a little bit more clearly where the change to the policy needs to occur, what types of services we want to bill for that we currently are not. And then we just have to decide at that point whether to implement it or not.
Here's the thing that I think that we should bear in mind, which is, how the taxpayer hears all of this, as they're already paying for a service to be present, that we don't receive a bill from our fire department when they come save our house. So, and clearly there's services that are more, you know, I have no idea what NAFCAN or however you say it, right? Like certain things cost, right? And so nor should people just be paying for everyone's stuff. But I think that somehow addressing that so people understand will be very important.
Yeah, and there are statutory prohibitions against charging or billing for certain types of fire response, as well as police response. You can charge for certain types of fire response. I know that City of Ithaca sends Ithaca College, famously, they send Ithaca College a bill every time a student pulls a fire alarm and there's actually no emergency. So there are those kinds of situations. But the actual response to the fire,
I'd be all for that if kids still do that.
I'm sure they do. But ambulance is a different world. It is, as I've been trying to impress upon legislators and others over the last year or two now at this point, you know, ambulance is healthcare. It's medicine. It's not traditional public safety, which is where police and fire tend to fall into. It's emergency services in the healthcare sector, really no different. And I'll resist the urge to climb on my soapbox about not making vaccines available to EMS employees because they're not frontline healthcare workers in the view of some, but it is medicine. And so I think we have to learn to treat it as such. And there's tremendous resistance all over the industry to doing that, primarily from us, from politicians, and from volunteer first responder organizations who still view it in that model, and understandably so. But you know, the more we see of the kind of this, the more I see of the care that is actually being provided by our paramedics on actual calls. It's mobile ER, really, is what it is, and thankfully so. But we have to make sure we have a way to pay for it, because it is only getting more expensive, never getting cheaper.
I've one thing to add to that, and then a kind of a tangent. I see our billing model, and from what I've read lightly about EMS, it seems to stem from the older model of EMS, where the people that showed up and drove you to the hospital, they didn't do a heck of a lot more other than hold your hand and give you some water on the way. And so if they didn't drive you there, then they weren't really providing a service, and so you wouldn't bill. And that makes sense in that world. As you're pointing out, Rorden, that's no longer the case. I mean, we have people driving out and providing a massive amount of service, maybe not driving, or driving while providing service for half an hour transport. It's a whole different world right now, to your point. So I think updating our billing in light of how it's evolved over time makes a lot of sense to me. I think one thing I might something to consider is taking this kind of piece by piece. So I know, Ben, I appreciated you giving that kind of scope of other things that exist out there. I would probably lean on the side of not trying to nickel and dime every possible different medicine per se, as an extreme. I know that wasn't where you were going, but I would think of what's kind of the first step we can take into this, and then see if that kind of we learn something, and maybe continue to kind of take off different chunks over the next couple of years or something as we kind of ease into it. It might be a way of just getting our bearings a little bit more as we navigate.
Yeah, and I think to that point, Ben, part of the reason to be thinking about this and have this conversation over the next couple of months and not couple of years is, you all are aware of my belief that our EMS department is going to be called on to do much more over the next couple of years. And if that leads to staffing increases, we are talking about very large budget increases. So it's not going to be, we are going to have to continue to look for alternative sources of revenue, whether it's contractual with organizations that need us to cover them. The fire budget model, although you did a lot of work to kind of tweak how that's broken up, there isn't anything fundamentally that's really changing with it. We're not providing different levels or types of services within the fire department, and the coverage area is not largely expanding. We don't have a threat, if you want to use that word. We don't have the threat that, for instance, the town of Ithaca Fire Department is going to suddenly disappear and we need to start covering further south. We have the very real reality, it's not even a threat, that EMS is going to be called on to do much more. So I think trying to get ahead of that, we have a guest. You're trying to get ahead of that from a revenue to support the services standpoint, particularly as we are always discussing with the towns, how to share the costs that already exist. I think that's really important.
Yeah, and maybe I wasn't clear. I think I'm for looking at those things. I think maybe I might be off base here, but I worry about getting kind of too granular and too many different slices and dices of budgeting right out of the gate, and worrying about, and then getting lost in the detail and the weeds of exactly how many dollars for this medicine and that. But I think where I would go is kind of expand it kind of generally first. What are the large swaths of calls we're not billing at all for? Let's kind of get those under a model, one or two different billing, price points or whatever kind of rough makes sense. And we can learn from that and kind of continue to iterate. But yeah, no, I maybe it was mostly just in response to Ben saying, like, this medicine, that medicine.
Yeah.
And that seems like getting in the weeds, and I wouldn't want to get that to trip us up on the way towards trying to kind of stake out some territory and then work within that.
Yeah, so I did just send out the comparison of other agencies, so you guys can check that out at your leisure. But I think what Chris and I have been working on up until this point is very much, I think, what Ben is saying, or at least along the same lines. We've been targeting, at least our current recommendation as we have it written now, which was sort of waiting for an update based on this meeting, was adding billing rates for treat and release in general, and then for transport specifically. So those other things, I think we agreed. It was a little bit much, especially things like fall assist, or lift assist rather, and EpiPens. It really did feel like nickel and diming. And it also feels like part of what our agency does, even though we are paid now, is really a community outreach, community good. I mean, I obviously the whole department is a community good, but we do want to maintain, I think, that that relationship with just being a community service for the community. And I think allowing some of those things to kind of, especially the lift assists, that's something that we do fairly regularly. If we started to bill for those, that would really change, I think, a lot of our relationship with the community. So we wanted to avoid those kinds of things, but that's where we're going. Hopefully by next meeting, we'll have something written up to share.
Yeah, and I agree with that, Ben. And I think, at least in my mind, and maybe there's a blurry line somewhere, but I haven't found it yet. I've always been able, or think I'm able to differentiate between. There seems to be a line that you can call something the provision of medical care versus not. Certainly if it's something where you need some type of a license or certificate to administer the narcotic, or where you need a license or a certificate to perform the action legally, that would seem to be, a line. Lift assists, showing up at a scene and seeing that the person does not need medical care. Those to me, that's not medicine. And that's where I think the community aspect of not trying to squeeze every last nickel out of the quote unquote patient makes sense, because they're not a patient if there's no medical care rendered. As soon as there's medical care rendered, then I think we are into that conversation about EMS being medicine now, rather than emergency response. So I think that's a good line to keep in mind when you and Chris are going through the ins and outs and the menu, the smorgasbord of different things that can be billed for.
That makes sense to me too, that approach.
Say again, Jess?
I was saying that makes sense, that approach of clearly medical, clearly needed a license of some sort to administer this thing is medicine. I can't walk into the ER and not get charged, right? Yeah.
So just one quick thing to add. The one gray area that Chris and I found was that something like an EKG, for instance, is considered ALS. So it's really a test to see if you need medical care. And that felt a little bit gray. In the end, and I would need Chris to explain this in the technical terms, but treat and release is a specific type of care, and it is defined. It's not just an arbitrary thing. But I'll leave it there. I mean, I really appreciate that feedback. I'll get with Chris and we'll bring something back.
Yeah. I would just add, for me, I'd love to observe that various data before really making a decision. I'd love to know how many calls we have that are of the transit variety, and also it'd be interesting to know. I mean, a lot of times I know with our departments and our services, it's not unusual that we are dealing with a lot of the same people sometimes, and you probably can get a feel for what percentage of those people are actually going to pay a bill, and does it even make sense to send bills that aren't going to get paid? Is that the majority of the problem? Is that the minority? I am very sensitive to the fact that I know we all know the realities of the coverage area expanding for our ambulance and it getting harder to retain staff and all of the additional certification required for them. And I mean, I look at the writing on the wall and I wonder how much of a choice you really have in a matter like this. Unfortunately, it's great to have community services and we want to keep those going as long as we can. But if there's 40% more billing that can be done there, that potentially, and emphasize potentially, is quite a bit of revenue for the department. So I guess I'm all for keeping all options on the table and look forward to the report.
Okay, good. Then stay tuned on that one. Next, we have DPW Water Sewer, CPZR, and Farmers Market, and a partridge in a pear tree this time of year. Mr. Darfler.
Need to start trimming this down somehow. All right, I'm going to actually take it in reverse order. So starting with the farmers market, the farmers market did hold a Thanksgiving market, which I hear was quite a success. They were encouraged by that market enough to try and think about maybe a Christmas market. I know they were looking for places, and I think they may have found a couple that would have worked lovely if it wasn't for COVID and reduced capacity. So I think that might be an idea that they'll put on hold for next year, but was really encouraged to see them continuing the market through the colder months and thinking about interesting ways of kind of keeping that front and center of people's minds. So very encouraged by what they're doing over there. On the CPZR front, our next meeting is on Thursday. As I mentioned last month, we are very, very near a final draft of the comprehensive plan. All final kind of comments should be in by our meeting on Thursday from the committee, with the caveat of one or two other small edits that we know are kind of outstanding, but the intent there is to roll those into any comments we get back from this board and other boards. So we'll kind of pause that and hold off on it. So we'll be looking to bring a final draft by end of year to this board and the other boards in the village. I mean, I guess by way of this board is probably the proper path for all that. And I don't know if people have kind of off the cuff ideas here of how long they'd like to have to sit with that and review it and give feedback on it. I should say we'll also hand it over. I'd like the department heads to take a look as well. It's just had it printed out. It's on the order of, I want to say maybe 80-ish pages with a bunch of appendices that gets it up to around 120 pages or so. It's not small print, densely packed by any means. It reads fairly quickly. I would give it a couple of hours to sit down with and really think through, though I may have more context, so I probably go a little more quickly than others. So something to consider if people have thoughts on how long they'd like to take for that. The idea at this point now is to essentially kick off the more formal review process with this board, other boards. Once that cycle's been done, we'll have a review cycle with the community, and then bring it back to this board for conversation and potential adoption. In the meantime, the committee will switch over to zoning, which we've already just barely started to look at, and we'll have more of a conversation on Thursday. So I don't know if people have an idea off the top of their head they might look for.
So I have a very clear timeline in my mind for that, which is 1 quarter. So Q1 of 2021 would be the opportunity for this board and the planning board and ZBA to review the documents, essentially submit questions back to this board with respect. I mean, to me, once CPZR has kind of handed off the final draft with their blessing, then I don't believe it's necessary or even relevant for the various boards to send comments back to CPZR. CPZR has kind of said, this is what we've come up with. This is what we think is your new comp plan, village. And so the 3 village boards would then look to see if there's any concerns. And then towards the end of Q1 is when we would have a couple of, I would think, at least 2, depending on what our COVID Zoom in-person situation is, at least 2 public informational sessions with respect to it, get feedback that way. And in early Q2, I'd like to be thinking about the actual public hearing portion of the adoption process. And then depending on how that dovetails, what kinds of changes, how into the weeds we get with that kind of thing. If the zoning revision has been taking place simultaneously, then, theoretically, we could be looking at a second half of 2021 adoption of zoning revision. So that's the time frame I've had in mind, unless anyone on this board thinks it needs to be much shorter or much longer.
I think, sorry, go ahead, Jess.
I was going to say definitely not longer, but I would love to see some sort of more clear deadlines, at least by week and month, to think about that, so that we can all make sure, like, no, we knew this. We knew we were going to have to dedicate some time to reading this pretty dense document, so that can actually happen for Q2.
I think that's a great timeline. I think that's a good framing too. I think I wasn't clear personally where the kind of if and where CPZR would have a role to play, post handing it off to the village board. But I think it makes sense for it to be more clear that, once we hand it off, that is kind of the final step of CPZR, and we'll transfer very clearly over to zoning. So that'll make sense. And I will, like I said, get us to send that over, get the committee to send that over by the end of the year. I don't think should be a problem. Like I said, there might be 1 or 2 pieces that maybe the committee kind of submits as feedback in a weird kind of way to the village board, just to kind of keep things moving forward. But I'm not too concerned about that. It's kind of a paragraph here or there that we want to tweak up a little bit.
Wait, so did you just say that in the next 2 weeks where there's a final document?
There should be a final draft by the end of the year. Yes. Yep. It is.
There's
a
real
final
time and space, 2 weeks, end of year.
Yeah, no, there's just to replay that. There is a final draft that EDR has given the committee already as of last month.
Okay.
And the committee has been reviewing it this month. We will, the deadline for those responses modulo these 2 little pieces that we know are outstanding is Thursday at our meeting. And so I want to give EDR a week or 2 to incorporate any feedback and comments we've had at that point. But I've been pushing everybody to end of year, have that wrapped up.
And so, Gordon, are you thinking, that does that get submitted to the board after from CPZR, or does it get submitted to the mayor?
No, it gets submitted to the board. I have seen the draft. It is. I'm very pleased. I mean, it's an impressive document. Tremendous amount of work has gone into it. So I think that this board. So if we'll call it, it's the week of the 28th. If we have it the week of the 28th, then this board, I think, will be very pleased as well. And then if we have kind of bearing in mind we're coming into budget season as well. You know, if we have January and February to really really kind of read it and absorb it and make notes. My gut instinct is that there probably won't be a whole heck of a lot of changes that this board will want to make. There'll be some questions. There'll be some, do we want to phrase this way instead of that way kind of thing? But there's just, it would be different if we were doing or duplicating a lot of the work that CPZR has done. It's monumental amount of work that they've done. I don't foresee, and prepared to be wrong if any of you prove me wrong, but I don't foresee this board having a lot of need or desire to change much in the document. It kind of is what it is in terms of reflecting the survey results and the community input and so on.
So given that, I mean, having a month to review it, then it seems like we could be discussing something in February.
We could certainly be discussing it in February, and depending again on what our meeting restrictions are, we could be scheduling public informational meetings for the March timeframe. You know, what does that look like? Pre-COVID, it would have been, you know, a large public informational meeting at the fire hall, maybe a workshop, maybe, you know, I don't know what that looks like now with the need for Zoom. Maybe that allows for broader input if we have one in person and one, if we're able to do something in person but then also do something remotely. We'll have to kind of feel that out over the next 8 to 10 weeks. But if we're able to do that in the March timeframe, plus or minus a few weeks, then, you know, I don't want to do the public hearing in April because that's our budget adoption meeting. So we could either schedule a separate meeting for the public hearing if we think there's going to be a lot of feedback and turnout, again, depending on whether it's in person or virtual, or we could push it to May. I don't have a strong feeling on that part. I mean, ideally, I got to say, ideally, for something like a comprehensive plan, I would really like to try to do something in person. You know, even if we have to use the high school auditorium and sit every third seat so we have appropriate distancing. It feels like not that, I mean, the executive orders on remote meetings and remote public hearings are fairly strong, but this would be the kind of thing that could potentially see litigation in the future if we're amending comp plans and zoning documents during COVID. If we haven't put forth a lot of effort to make sure there's a lot of public comment on especially on the draft.
Well, I'll say we'll also know a lot more at that point. I mean, it could be one of those things. If we get somewhere and it looks like if we hold off a couple extra months, it would be worth our while. I don't see it as blocking anything other than probably the final stages of review and adoption of zoning. So we may have some wiggle room in there if we feel like we want it.
Right.
I think that my point too is that I just want to make sure that the boards don't, I just want to keep the fire lit. Like, let's keep this going. Like, we can have all of our discussions and anything that, like you're saying, will just be, I think this section should go here, like nothing major. So then great, let's have it all in place and tied it up so that it can go public. And I think definitely a concern is being ADA compliant. I mean, if this is going to be a Zoom call, is there room for hearing impaired people to understand what's happening? I guess there isn't in our town meetings at all. So I don't know, something to think about, I think.
I can put something there. You can hire ASL signers for Zoom calls, just as an FYI, if that were a thing that becomes an issue for us.
I think it's something to consider when we get closer to that, right?
I think so. It's a really good question. I don't know if we've had, even I'm thinking back prior to Zoom calls, right? In-person calls hasn't come up.
Yeah, we haven't had an ASL representative at any board meeting that I've been part of in the village, nor has anyone asked. So there's certainly this is just coming from the modern world, and I don't mean to overcomplicate things, but Nor do I know that we certainly know many of us are headed in this direction, that hearing impairment comes in all different forms and Zoom calls are difficult, but I don't know sign language. So I might not be able to hear this Zoom call well, but it doesn't mean that a sign language would be helpful. But maybe closed captioned would. So something to consider.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you for that. That's helpful, and that'll help me guide the committee through kind of what the next steps on that look like as well. So glad we had that conversation. And then with that, we'll switch to DPW. So we made it to the end of leaf season one way or another. That was a win. Glad that is behind us, and knock on wood, we have worked out the hitches and giddy ups and whatnot with the leaf machine. So it will hopefully serve us well next year. We'll see. Here's hoping. I on a more serious note around that, though, I am talking with Dusty on ways that we can kind of improve just setting of expectations and kind of communication around leaves, because it does tend to bite us a bit, and it can be a little bit kind of ad hoc when things come up and when the guys can get out there, and then if the leaf truck has an issue and so forth. So we're thinking through some ideas on just how to kind of smooth that over, recognizing that we're not going to staff and hire to a position where we're can guarantee your leaves will get taken at 8:00 on this day. But I think there are some ways we can do just a little bit of improvement on the communication and the expectations there. On some of the other ongoing DPW projects, the cemetery bridge, which is a town project, is slowly moving forward. I have a board meeting from the town that I intend to listen to where there's an update. Unless Mark's around still and has any details to add to that. But the piece where the village comes in is we are looking at joining in that project to have the cemetery water main extended and connected to the Lake Street water main, and that will help with some pressure and other issues when you have dead ends in the circuit there in our water system. So that's something we're looking at and talking with the principal engineer for the bridge project. The walking bridge behind the post office is on hold for the winter as far as actual construction, but MRB is working through detailed drawings so that we should be hopefully fairly shovel ready in the spring to start working on that work, which is exciting because that's been a many-year frustration of ours, and huge thanks to Alan and others who have worked on that, who've kind of seemed to find at least a temporary to intermediate fix while we work on all the other issues that we've now uncovered around that bridge. And then the sewer law also slowly continues to move forward. Right now, where the MRB is working through some different scenarios around calculating of sewer rates for non-residential. So how do you kind of figure out what's a reasonable rate for a business? What's that based on? What kind of business? How big is the business? These types of things. So they're doing a deep dive on our current billing and seeing if there's some sort of kind of general rules of thumb that they can tease out of that. Our expectation is that billing is probably a bit ad hoc and kind of has just existed as it's existed without really trying to rationalize it. So we're going to see if there's a way to kind of bring some structure to that in a way that makes some sort of sense that we can then codify in the law and kind of moving forward use a better, more consistent standard. That is all I have, unless there's any questions.
Any questions or additional comments for them?
Yeah, Ben, I actually have a question. Where are we with the survey of water mitigation on the Congress Street area?
That is a good question. I actually haven't heard an update. I know that MRB was out surveying a couple weeks, almost a month ago. Yeah, and so I haven't seen any updates, drawings, or anything from them yet on that. I did have a note to possibly reach out if I haven't heard anything in the next couple of weeks.
Okay, and then have we, and forgive me if I'm not recalling, have we talked about what a timeline for activity would be for that project to start and finish?
My understanding is this is another so the intent on our end is to get it kind of again to shovel ready, so drawings and a plan, possibly bid it out even. But it will depend on the funding coming through. So that's funded through DASNY grants, which are approved but not being released as of right now due to funding issues at the state level for COVID. So we're in a bit of a kind of get all our ducks in a row and then hope that the funding gets released in a timely manner, maybe in the spring when we can start digging into that.
Okay, so something that we should consider, and now I'm wearing my Chamber of Commerce hat, is that the Trumansburg Crit is still slated to be the New York State Championship race this year, and that is slated for August 14th, pandemic providing. And that is, arguably a considerable event for the village.
Yeah.
So something to consider, because that would be definitely impacted by activity on those roads.
That's great. Yes, let's keep that in mind as we get closer to that. I suspect we'll hear here at the board when that funding's starting happening, but I will keep that in mind as well if something moves more quickly than we're talking about it here. And that we'll see kind of what the timeline is for those things and where the crit, path is and where the work is, and if we can kind of make it all work together.
Right. I mean, right. And lots of things are happening in between now and then, but they are assuming that cycling can happen in some form in August. So
just cycle faster so there's more wind going by you,
I'm looking through my emails and for some reason I can't find it. I did get an email within the last 3 weeks or so from DASNY. Basically, we've been approved from all of their due diligence research. There was one more level of rubber stamping that needed to take place. Boy, I wish I could find that email right now. Basically, we're done as far as any review on the funding, and we are all simply waiting on the governor to release this funding's already been allocated by the legislature, but it's frozen by the governor's office. So we're all just waiting. Once that there isn't anything, in theory, we could begin to move forward in anticipation of receiving funding, but that I think is a little dicey, given the cost. So,
thanks.
Anything else for Ben? If not, then police, if Keith is available. Any updates on police?
He is. I'll make it quick, everybody. Basically just run through some numbers for you and a couple other updates. So 267 calls for service in the month of November. Nine calls from outside the village. And we had a couple domestic disputes, an assault, a couple larcenies, DWI arrest made by Officer Covert, and a number of vehicle and traffic stops, about 24 of those. That's the bird's eye view. Roden talked about the ongoing work of the various policing discussions. I'm continuing to stay engaged with the two groups we met with originally to continue to kind of hear their feedback and get their opinions on their meetings and trying to kind of connect them. As we had two different meetings because some people want to do in person, some people want to do virtual. And so just trying to kind of get them all into one dialogue through email. There might be doing some Zooms with them in the future just to keep a dialogue going to make sure they don't feel forgotten. That's some of the feedback that I received, that they don't want to feel like we're just moving on to the other areas of the village in terms of the business district and the nonprofits and government officials. They want to continue to be part of the process, and I definitely want to make good on that. It is the holiday season, so certainly having things delivered to your homes and whatnot. Just, I would urge everyone who's listening, I don't know how many people that is or will be, but if you want to pass the word, just, remember to take care of the packages showing up at your house. Luckily, so many of us are working from home now. It's not as probably big of an issue as it used to be, but just something to keep in mind during the holidays. And also the department continues, Joe wanted to mention that the department continues to keep all COVID-19 safety measures in place, which means screening individuals prior to entry and enforcement of face coverings and sanitation. Every so often we do get a call in about, someone seeing an officer not with a face covering in different circumstances. And, just want to remind everyone that it is, certainly part of the department's policy that those coverings be used at every possible means, at all possible means and time. So, but please, everyone should feel free to share that feedback as we go along if they'd like. We did have a grant come through. We're kind of waiting to see if so it's a grant that kind of one of those reimbursement grants. So I think Joe wants to see if kind of what we might purchase and what it's going to cost and stuff before really talking up the grant and everything to make sure that it's something we can use appropriately. I think we can, but we're probably another meeting away before we really have to present that. But I just wanted to mention that as a means of thanking Officer Covert for continuing to do a lot of grant writing for the department and trying to secure funding for different aspects of the department as much as possible. And I think that's pretty much it for me. Short report.
Any comments or questions for Keith? I will just add that without scooping the topic of the grant, I am aware of the grant process itself is actually very difficult. It's fairly complicated or complex grant application, which was a little surprising to me given what the grant is for, but it is for $15,000, so it's a large dollar amount, and the grant application portal was not very user friendly, and it was again fairly complex. So Officer Covert deserves a lot of credit for forging ahead through that process. Treasurer Vicky, you're up.
Sorry, I lost the mouse. With what Roden had said about meeting with the department heads, which is, I think, is a great idea coming into budget season, because I know I had talked to Ben Darfler, and I'm sorry, I always sit with Chief prior to him meeting with Keith about, and Ben and I talked about, Dustin and I sitting to do the budget and then talking to him about it. So Roden meeting with them prior to that. So I'll wait until you meet with them, okay, Roden? Before I meet with either one of them.
I wouldn't wait. I plan to meet with them in early to mid-January, but if you're ahead of that, then that's fine.
Oh, okay. Because I thought, well, if they know what their goals are, then that might be that make their budget easier. But anyway, that was one thing. I believe by the time I get to work tomorrow, I should have all the bank statements for November, because I know you're all interested in where we are budget-wise. So I try to do them as soon as they come. So hopefully, maybe by the end of this week, possibly next week, November will be balanced. We have, with Tammy being out, I just thought you guys should know, Morgan is working Monday and Wednesdays, and I'm working Tuesday and Thursdays. Next week, we have a slight change. I'm gonna work in the morning on Tuesday, and Morgan's gonna work in the afternoon, and then I'm gonna work for Morgan on Wednesday because she has requested the day off. The fourth thing is on the agenda. With Tammy being out so much in the last few months, or the last few weeks, sorry. And with the COVID thing, I would like to request from the board that they suspend our maximum time we can earn, at least through this COVID thing. Because it really is very hard to take time off at this point. And with me, with budget season, I don't generally take time off during budget season. But I am very close to maxing out at least my vacation time. And I have all of my personal time left. I don't know exactly where Morgan and I know Tammy's very close kind of too. So that's my request to the board.
You're talking about lifting the cap on accruals?
Yes.
So you're saying that you'll have the maximum amount accrued.
In December, I will have the max for vacation time accrued, and I'm about 50 hours short with sick time. Morgan can tell you where she and stands.
Well, I'm nowhere near maxed out, but I know Tammy is. I don't know like what she's exactly at, but she's up there too.
Board thoughts?
I guess I'm a little bit confused still, so forgive me. So you're saying that before December 31st, Vicky, you have already used all of your sick time and vacation time?
No, I'm
Yeah.
saying that
Yeah.
I haven't used it, and we have a max time that we're allowed to hold. Otherwise, we don't earn time.
So I forget. So Jess, I forget the number. But just for argument's sake, if an employee can accrue X amount of vacation time per month, so let's say you get two vacation days a month, there is a cap on how many vacation days you can carry.
Through to the next.
And well, we used to have a use it or lose it policy in the village. We did away with the use it or lose it in exchange for a cap, and you can carry that for as long as you want, but you don't exceed that. So if you have 4 weeks of vacation time and you don't take a vacation, next year you only have 4 weeks of vacation time. If you take a week off, then you can accrue that week back. So in the case of Vicky and Tammy and Morgan, the issue is that they haven't taken any time off. And so the request that Vicky is making is that we allow them to accrue time in excess of our current maximum. My concern right off the bat, Vic, my concern is that we would not want to apply this arbitrarily to only a couple of employees.
I'm just requesting for our office, Warden.
I'm saying we would not be on solid legal ground, I don't believe, to only apply that to your office. We would have
Okay.
to apply that across the board to all village employees outside of the bargaining unit.
Yeah, that I wasn't positive of.
And so if that happens, and actually, even if we could just apply it to your office, my concern would be, when are you actually going to make up your not taking vacation? Are we going to have an empty office in 2021 because we have so much vacation time accrued? Or Morgan going to be by herself? Actually, would be more likely. She'd be by herself for 6 weeks on end because everyone else is on vacation.
And
But more broadly, we have a full-time police officer.
Right.
and we have lots of EMS staff.
Right.
So I would have a concern about allowing for a lot of accrual, although I certainly, employee health, both physical and mental, does require time off. So I'm sensitive to that. But I also know we've seen in one department in particular where a lot of vacation is used at once by several employees, and that does blow a hole in our overtime budget.
Right. I mean, I get both sides. I just figured it was, I don't know what, I don't have a solution really. And I mean, taking our time, that's, because right now I'll have to take a day a month to,
Right.
I'll have to take what I earn until, we're allowed to go somewhere. And I think with being at home more, well, I personally don't feel like I need the time off as much as I did when you work 4 or 5 days a week, that kind of thing.
And I think you had your hand up. Did you want to add something?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for letting me chime in. We talked about this today at our budget capital personnel meeting because we have a similar issue across the board with a lot of our employees. So we have various unions and non-union. We have just a lot of different things. So we've been coordinating with our unions and negotiating with them to either let the accruals build up higher than the maximum, or depending on what we negotiate, let them cash out. So at the end of the year, they get paid for the vacation time that they couldn't use, a certain amount so that they could start accruing again.
Yeah.
I mean,
Your budget's a little bit larger than ours, Ann.
yeah, I was as the money person, I'm not even comfortable with that.
Well, I just wanted to tell you those, some options. We were trying to be creative because, we certainly, with the pandemic, we certainly didn't want to, in a way, again, penalize people.
Right. Right.
Board thoughts?
I mean, I think for my sake, I always see things through an EMS lens, and it feels like a much harder question there. So I think I'll have to just think a little bit about it before I have a sound answer.
So trying to put my hat on from like in my more professional position, my first reaction was actually, in some ways, I think there's a value to forcing people to take a vacation, because I think we don't need vacations in this pandemic, and we kind of need a vacation, even if it's just to sit around the house and not do anything. Though
More than ever.
Yeah, you did just say, Vicky, that you don't feel similarly. So I don't want to pretend that I can tell you how you should feel about anything like that.
Right. I mean, but I don't have the stress. I mean, I don't have kids at home that need to be homeschooled. Thank God. I don't have that. Thank God. So I just don't have that pressure that probably somebody with, a larger family, kids at home, that sort of thing. So on my days home, I work and I'm here and I'm comfortable and I can do it in my pajamas and that, that kind of thing. So I don't feel the stresses to having to get up and pack lunch and go to work and, the kitchen's right there. And so,
yeah, I guess I feel like I hear where you're coming from, but when I kind of zoom out and look at the rest of the whole village, I think my inclination is that.
Right.
Yeah.
And I get that. And that's why I was only approaching it from our department and where we stand, because I don't know about the other departments and but I understand what Gordon was saying about the legality of it too, because, I don't want to do anything that's going to, bring anything on to the village that people say this isn't fair because the offices, because we really do. We're not there on Fridays and, I get all that. It was.
So we've got two different conversations going on here, though. One is, should people take vacation time?
Mm-hmm.
The other is, people have not taken vacation time, so they're not going to accrue more vacation time that they're not going to take.
Oh, I'll
So
take
you're,
it.
so the reality is that although you may not be able to travel anywhere, depending on what state you want to go visit, the reality is we have not suspended the ability for people to take vacations.
Right.
And Lord knows we've had some EMS employees, certainly they've taken vacations, and that, people are taking vacations if they want to. So we have not suspended that. And so, yeah, so I don't know that this is where Ben was going, but it did, what you said, Ben, did clarify for me. We're not talking about a request to take vacations when we are for some reason not allowing it.
Right.
If anything, there's too much vacation time being accrued that is not being used, and what do we do about that?
That was my question, Lauren. So I'm in a similar position to you, Vicky, although I don't have to go in at all. But I did sort of hoard my vacation days in case something happened and I needed to be at home. Well, that something didn't happen. And so I had to, and we don't, there is no option for it to roll over. So I used it. So that was my question was, has anyone asked for vacation that's been denied?
No.
As a result of the COVID statement. And then that would be, to me, something to consider. If this has just been a personal choice and use of time, knowing what the policy is, I think I sort of, but I'm a little bit hard line. So I'm on the conservative panel here.
It is kind of a personal choice, except for I didn't want to put all of that burden with Tammy not being in the office at all, basically on Morgan.
Which is a great conversation to have with your supervisor, I think, right? Who's the mayor during the course as you're feeling that way, right? And then he can say, oh, take your vacation. Or thank you for asking. Can you wait till next week? Or whatever.
It just happened to come up in the last couple of weeks. So I thought we might as well discuss it now before it gets way out of hand. And, so, I mean, I'm fine either way. As long as you guys kind of know what's going on.
Ben Carver, Keith, any comment?
I would just say that I'm, my day job has taught me to be really sensitive to the topic, similar to what Ben Darver was saying about, almost making sure you push vacation time to happen. I do think that's important. Speaking as a Cornell employee, probably 4 or 5 years ago, they capped us. They didn't used to cap us, but they capped us. And they did it because I don't know if anyone's familiar with Cornell, but the HR presence there is not small. And they did it because they were very worried about employee mental health and employees. There was just so many employees that were not taking vacation. Now, maybe they were taking vacation and not logging it, but that's on the supervisor to make sure that's happening. But I think it was more so they were just finding that people were not taking a break. People were, Cornell is a pretty good vacation policy. I think you start at three weeks as a first-time employee, and you work your way up from there. But the fact that people are only taking, 5-6 days of vacation a year, and it just kept accruing. So I think there's, if we have a situation where our employees feel like they can't take vacation, I think that's the problem we need to address. And I don't think you address that by adding more vacation. I know we're in strange circumstances right now, and especially within our office, in addition to COVID. But I think, we should just talk through the expectations we have for our staff and make sure that people don't feel like they have to take on more than they can take on. So I think, and I don't know if that's a private conversation or a more public one, but if people are feeling like they have to work above and beyond their job description or the hours that they're typically would put in, or whatever it is that's not allowing for vacation time, then I think we need to have an honest conversation about that.
I think part of it was the fact that, yes, you can take vacation time and sit in your house, you can't really go anywhere. You can't really do anything either. So I don't know whether that's relaxing to someone or not.
Well, as someone with 3 kids, 9 and under, it's certainly not relaxing for me. But um, but at the same
You know,
time, I understand the value. I mean, I think in some ways there's a new pressure to somehow take that time, because otherwise your professional life and your domestic life are just one, and because you're living in the same space, you're doing your work in the same space that you're living in.
right.
And
You just described my life, Keith.
so even though you don't leave, you can't travel or you can't go places. I think it's more about the mental separation from the work. And the mayor hasn't closed the sidewalks yet. We can go for walks and get out of the house, and there's things we can do. And it might sound like it's a lack of empathy, but at the same time, I think all of us are kind of feeling this. There's this push to be creative in how we break away and how we separate ourselves from work. And I think there's some responsibility at times on the employer to push that issue a little bit. And I'm not saying that's really where we're at here, but just in terms of the broader discussion about vacation getting used and helping people break away.
Ben Carver, any comments?
I'm not sure I have anything to add to what I said before. I mean, to me, it feels like a complex discussion, maybe just because I see it so much through the lens of EMS, where it's just a very different context. And it does feel, I think, maybe like a conversation that should be had in private to some degree, I guess. So I'd
Right.
rather wait to voice a real concrete opinion till I can give it a little more thought.
Well, let's think on it a little bit. It's not something we can't do retroactively if we decided we wanted to in January. I am concerned about finding that balance and not setting us up for a lot of vacation being taken at once in a future year across multiple departments. It's not really the front office that I worry about. It's others. So stay tuned.
Okay. With that said, last thing, and that's fine. That's fine. What is our schedule going to be for the Christmas, New Year's break? Do we have, I know that Tammy had asked, mentioned it to you, but.
Well, the village office will be closed the 24th and 25th and the 30th and the 31st and the 1st.
Correct. But okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So it would be open Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, unless, well, the intention at this time is to be open Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, both weeks.
Okay. Okay. Because generally Friday, because we're off and it's a paid holiday, we would move that holiday to the following Monday or whenever. So that's why I was curious.
All right, we can decide that offline.
Okay. All right. Then that's all I have then.
Okay. Morgan, anything from the clerk side of things?
So the unpaid taxes went to the county.
Okay.
Water bills will be going out at the beginning of the month. And with Tammy being out, if anybody needs anything, you can email me or text me, whatever. That's about it.
Any questions for Morgan? Then we are on to old business. I think Ben has an update for us on our website refresh.
Yeah, this is real quick. I had sent out a link to everybody with the initial kind of version of the website with just very static pages, no links or anything. That link will continue to improve, and I actually just checked it today, and there's already some sections, and some of the departments have pages and so forth. So they are bit by bit moving the content from our current website over there, and as that continues to evolve, we'll find times that are good to take a look and give more structured feedback. But that's moving along swimmingly, and it looks great so far. That's it.
Good. Keep those draft pages coming. They look good. New business. We've got a couple of items we have on the agenda is State of the Village 2021. So I would like to. I don't know if anyone has any comments or input on it. We have to decide on a date. Number one, we usually do we have been doing the first Saturday in February, which is the 6th. We again also have the issue of in-person versus Zoom or some combination of the two, not knowing what exactly that will look like. There's actually not a prohibition at this time against in-person meetings. We would just have to, we wouldn't be able to have a large group. We'd have to cap it at the 50, including all of us, and of course maintain distancing, etc. So we do have the option, unless something changes between now and then, which it very well could. We could do some type of a hybrid, in-person and virtual. We could push it off if we think that later in the spring would make more sense, or we could plan on doing it just completely virtual and advertise it as such. Any thoughts on that, either in terms of format or timing?
Well, I don't know. I think my initial reaction is I feel like we're going to lose a lot of the public by offering virtual only. And that's just, I don't think people might log in. I don't know how enjoyable of an experience it would be for them. I think the state of the village seems to skew older. So there's that consideration, but then at the same time, the older you are, the less likely you might want to come out and do anything in person at all. Going back to the previous discussion about spreading people out and in person, I wonder if we'd be able to use something like the high school auditorium to spread people out. At first I was thinking something outdoors and just be out in the elements, and that might be kind of fun, but that's not going to work. So maybe a larger indoor venue.
Why would being outside not work? Because the timing would have to push it farther towards spring.
Well, I mean, if we did it outside in January, I just wonder how many people are going to come out and sit in the cold for 3 hours.
I probably wouldn't go. I'll be honest.
Not in February, but Gordon, is that, so the safest thing, the best thing, if there's still a virus, would be to be able to do it outside. Does it need to be in February?
No, and I'm trying to think back. Tammy might remember. I'm trying to remember. So our first State of the Village was, I think, 2013. It was either 12 or 13. Deb might remember, actually.
I think it was 30 yeah.
And I don't specifically recall the reason why we did it, but there was something. It might have been the water and sewer projects. It might have been because we were about to bond out for those. So there was a timing element. It's also going into budget season. But I know that I could see, I hate using COVID as an excuse for everything, but I could see us, if we wanted to, I could see us pushing State of the Village closer to the summer. We would certainly get residents who winter elsewhere who would be able to attend if they're home by then. If it's after school that's out, of course, if they're virtual, it doesn't really matter. But we don't want to run into, one of the thoughts in terms of timing is we don't want to run into classic or typical summer vacation timeframe. But I could also see the advantage of holding it after we've adopted a budget. So we could explain, nobody shows up to our budget meetings, workshops, and hearings. So we would give us the opportunity to explain what we've already done in terms of the budget adoption, particularly if there's any spending items that are newer. So, I think the January, February timeframe is always kind of a nice after the new year, post-holiday, pre-spring doldrums kind of thing to hold the state of the village and tell everyone what we're up to. But I could be talked into, pushing it off to after Memorial Day, if that seemed to make sense.
The more you talk of it, the more I like that idea of aligning it a little more closely to the village municipal year. I think that kind of gives more interesting things to talk about. And certainly it wouldn't hurt to at least give it a solid try one time this year, using the COVID excuse, and then kind of try it on for size and see how it fits. And we could always just say, well, that go back to the usual, or, hey, we learned something new and we'll give this thing an ongoing try.
At what point do we start running into those comp plan meetings and things, though? I mean, we don't want to go too far because then we're going to be just rapid fire big public meetings, right?
Could be an opportunity to combine some of that stuff too. I mean, I don't know if this is a good idea, but I was half thinking like our annual meeting could even be the state of the village. I mean, the annual meeting's a little bit boring. Maybe it's not the right place, but there could be some opportunity to kind of include some more elements that might be interesting too. Just kind of thinking off the top of my head.
And I am recalling now, at least, we're talking 2013, in a typical non-COVID year, June is tricky because you have a lot of school end of year issues. You've got graduation one of those weeks or weekends, and you have various events going on in June on the weekends if we wanted to hold State of the Village on a Saturday, which I still think is a good time. Mid-May.
I think May 15th, State of the Union and chicken barbecue sounds like a heck of a good time.
Isn't that Mother's Day weekend?
I think May 22nd sounds like Mother's Day barbecue, Mother's Day fundraiser for pick your fire department. I mean, EMS. I mean,
yeah, I mean, in between Mother's Day and Memorial Day, I mean, that might work.
I think that's nice. And I'm serious about the chicken barbecue. I think that people are going to it's spring renewal, come out of your homes. Let's have a thing. I'm not saying it can be a fundraiser for whatever. Maybe Rotary wants to do something, but make it fun.
Well, and if that becomes precedent, it's nice because it would follow elections also, because new board members would be seated in April is our first meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And then you come in and do
throw them right in front of everybody.
Yeah.
On month 2.
Here's the people. Here's their plan for the next year.
Also, Gordon, I agree with your sentiment though that in February was kind of a fun thing to look forward to if you're into civics, and there were donuts. So I don't know that just because we try it in the spring this year, it has to always stay that way. I mean, I think we like to establish routine, and it's an opportunity to test a new format, but it doesn't have to be in perpetuity.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think. If it's that third weekend in May, it's upstate New York, so there's no guarantee the weather will be nice. Where would we do it outside? I mean, the farmer's market comes to mind. We could always put additional pop-up tents up if it's raining.
And Ben, can you remind us when market opens? Does it open in June?
No, it opens in May. I think it's May to October.
So that's also kind of hey, stuff's happening here thing, right? Market's open. Here we are. I just really love chicken, so I'm going to stop talking.
So what's the feeling of the board? Do we want to try a May State of the Village this year?
So
No
I'll
elections
have
this year, so it's all of us.
I'll have a hard time. My finals week is that 22nd through, well, what is it? The 20th through the 26th, I think, which is a weird time. So it would be tough for me, but my finals are tomorrow. So obviously I can still participate. That's not prohibitive. It's just not exactly ideal.
This is why I always said we should not have students on this board.
In my defense, I didn't start out as a student. You know, I was elected under false
That's true.
pretenses. But here we are.
Any other yays or nays for May?
No, I mean, of all the years to try it, I mean, it makes a lot of sense to try it and see if it seems like it'd be a nice event.
Actually, that reminds me of something.
Could get in the way of a mayor's golf day, but
Nah, there's plenty of golf on a Saturday after the State of the Village. Let me check one thing very quickly here.
So just to throw one thing out there, this is maybe a minor consideration, but we also will have an Arbor Day celebration, hopefully next April 30th or May 1st, which is kind of scary close to bad weather probably, but that would be one option to sort of combine things.
Yeah.
I have Mother's Day on the 9th.
Is it early this year?
So we could talk about the 15th too, if that makes it easier for Ben.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's table this to January meeting and then pick a date tentatively later in the spring. I was just looking something up. This reminded me that this coming summer, June, is actually the 70th anniversary of the incorporation of the fire company. So the chicken barbecue fundraiser in that time frame actually does make some sense. And I know Matt and I have been talking about some other ideas to honor the fire company this year. Yeah, 70th anniversary of the incorporation of the fire company. No word on whether Jack Fulton was actually there that day or not. Okay, so that's State of the Village. We will revisit in January. And then a couple of new business items we added at the beginning of the meeting. Ben, do you want to give I'll start. I received an email earlier this week from Rod Howe, who's the supervisor for the town of Ithaca. He's been working over the last couple of years on template language that TCOG municipalities could use if they're interested in community choice aggregation, which I'll let Ben describe in more detail, but it's essentially municipalities opting in to the default energy provider for their community and then choosing either alternative energy or solar, or being able to the municipalities that all do it at the same time may be able to get some pricing power on that type of energy supply. Individual users through their electric bill can always opt out of that and choose whatever supplier they want. But statistically, most people opt for whatever the default energy supplier happens to be. So Rod sent kind of template or boilerplate legislation language to some of us in TCOG. He's looking basically for buy-in and more efforts on their working group. Not 100% sure I have the bandwidth or the time to be the representative to do that. But he is looking for feedback on municipalities who are interested. And Ben, if you want to just kind of give the broad brush overview. And the question for tonight is, how interested are we as a village in participating, and at what level?
Yeah, so I think Royden kind of summed it up, but I'll just kind of reiterate in maybe a different way, helps it land differently. Everyone, when you buy electricity, you sign up and you get a default energy provider. In New York, your energy provider is different than the transportation lines, and you pay for them separately. That's how we have deregulated energy. I, for instance, have purchased a different energy provider that does a mix of solar or something like that. I don't remember the details. Anyone can choose to pick any provider they want. At some point, the state was the one that picked what the default provider was, and that's basically just to say that NYSEG gets to choose. And then at some point, they allowed municipalities to make that decision on behalf of their residents. So CCA, community choice aggregation, is basically just that. It would be any municipality has the right to say the default provider for our municipality is now X instead of Y, and that's that. Where it gets interesting, as Roden kind of pointed out, is if you have a number of municipalities, maybe many or all of the municipalities in Tompkins County joining together and say, hey, we now have 100,000 residents that want to buy default energy from you. What kind of deal can you give us? You start looking at getting some interesting pricing benefits. And then more and more, that's being paired with, okay, we want 100% renewable. And then what can you do for the deal? And oftentimes it's at the same cost, if not even still below kind of the default NYSEG provided energy. So it's a very interesting kind of mechanic that's available once you kind of bring a number of municipalities together. So I like the idea of TCOG kind of trying to loosely organize this and get people together. Obviously that means it'll slow that whole thing down, but there's power in the kind of group aggregate demand that's there. So I think it's something we should definitely look at. I think there's an opportunity for us to switch a large percentage of the village over to renewable energy for probably the same, if not less cost. Obviously, nothing's set in stone. The details would be where the important piece is, but I think the first step is just to say that we are, as a municipality, kind of taking the reins and saying we will now start to decide for our community what the default is. And then if we get a better deal that we like, we can sign on to that deal and have that rolled out. And as Roden said, anyone is always fair game to go pick a different provider. And if you've already picked a different provider, like I have, for instance, you wouldn't get rolled into this new thing because we're changing something. There's a lot of choice still baked into the whole thing. So I think it's something that's worth looking into. I don't know what the time commitment is, but I'm interested in helping out a little bit more deeply. I've been listening to some of the webinars that they've had recently on some of the details, and there are places that this can go further, where you can start talking about having that power of choice to help support local solar builds and kind of bringing customers in, which is beneficial to those builds because the cost of acquisition for new energy users is high. And so if you as a municipality can say, hey, we've got 800 homes and they'll come in, if we switch over to you, that can help fund some of these solar builds. And I know Roden's talked about looking at solar as an option in the village. So there's some interesting things that can roll out of this further down the road. That's all much further down the road. I think the first step would just be to start looking at this model law and seeing if there's enough critical mass in the county to do something interesting with it.
So I guess the question for the board is there any reason not to participate in this early stage effort to draft template law that Tompkins municipalities can use? And potentially if that leads to TCOG municipalities looking to purchase, TCOG municipalities that opt to do this, having them potentially be able to purchase electricity in bulk from an alternative energy provider.
So I'm strongly in favor of this. I actually, a couple years ago, for some reason, I was under the impression that community choice had to happen at the county level. And I don't know if that's changed or if I just misunderstood it, but I'm absolutely on board. I fully, very much in favor. I think this is great. Ben, thank you for finding this and whatever went into that. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is going through TCOG and Terry at Cooperative Extension, some other folks, Irene and others that are working on it. Yeah, unfortunately, it actually cannot happen at the municipality. It has to happen at the lowest level of government. So there is kind of this coordination of TCOG kind of trying to herd cats, but all the different individual municipalities would have to sign their own CCA law saying that they can take over that power and then band together as a buying pool. So there's a little bit of, yeah, herding cats, but I think it's well worth the effort.
Jessica or Keith, any comment? Okay.
I will say,
All right.
I dropped the draft template model law. It's like 5 steps before it actually is anything, but it is in the Dropbox if people want to take a look at that.
I will reply then to Rod and let him know that we're interested and kind of feel him out for what kind of effort or time commitment he's looking for on our part. See where that leads. Then the last item of new business, unless anyone else has anything new to add, is Tom Myers has asked us to consider changes to building permit fees. That is in the Dropbox. There's a spreadsheet that says fee schedule comparison, which is simply what he had sent us previously. I will kick it off by saying that I am concerned initially that the $5 per 1,000 flat fee, although relative to project size, it's not a large dollar. It is, however, a significant percentage increase to the existing fees charged for the lower dollar amount projects. For instance, the residential home project at $50,000. Currently, that building permit is $175. One can certainly argue that that's too low. At $5 per, now we've jumped that up to $250, and that feels like a large increase. I don't know that I don't know from a dollar perspective, it's not large relative to the size of the project. A $250,000 new home. You don't get a lot of those built in the village, but seeing that increase from $425 to $1,250 feels like a large jump. But I want to open that up to board conversation, what we feel is a fair number so that we are recouping certainly Tom's time without nickel and diming, particularly here we are with claiming COVID again, nickel and diming the residents who are choosing to do home renovations and whatnot. And also the same question applies to the large projects. We don't necessarily want to burden, or do we want to burden large projects with larger costs and fees, either as a deterrent or as a consideration that they have to think carefully about.
The main question would be, for me at least, is how is Tom's time actually reflected? Is it reasonable to expect that he would put 10 times as much into a $10 million project as a $1 million project, or how linear is his relationship with it as far as time goes? Sorry, that's a convoluted way to ask it, but does this reflect his actual time invested in a given project?
I guess the easy answer is it depends. We can all think of the $50,000 home renovation where he only has to show up once to inspect everything at the end, versus the same cost renovation where there's problems every day and he's always on site. And I don't know that it's easy to make a blanket statement, but it certainly stands to reason that a large scale project he is going to need to visit much more often. Whether that's once a day, once a week, once a month, depends a lot on the nature of the work. I do think we're too low on the high end relative, to other Tompkins County municipalities. I tend to lean towards not wanting to overcharge single family residences. particularly when we talk about home affordability and how hard it is for families to purchase homes. So, if they buy, not to get, too specific, but, if someone buys a $200,000 house in the village, if they can find one that needs $150,000 worth of work, and they can afford that, then the argument is that they can afford the building permit. On the other hand, it is another $1,500 if we go to $5 per. So I want to be sensitive to both sides of $1,000 versus a $200,000 project is not a large amount percentage wise, but it's still money.
And that's where I'm sitting with it, Gordon, is sort of those in the middle spaces, because certainly $1,500 means a lot when you're putting in a floor, right? Where you're choosing materials, and that's significant. And so I'm having a hard time choking down that sum.
Yeah, I mean, $1,500 is, it could be cabinets, it could be the countertop, it could be, depending on the scope or scale, it's meaningful. And there is an argument,
right? Having been a person who built homes, now granted it was 20 years ago and it was in Hector, it definitely was nowhere near $1,000 building permit for the entire structure. That seems really high. And are we saying, just to be clear, I apologize if I'm not soaking this in, we're right now at a $2 structure? No, we're at this flat rate, right?
We are at the permit fee structure table was developed years and years ago on a graduated scale. So it's not a flat per dollar charge. And I don't recall exactly where that number came from, if it's a percentage or how it was developed. It was actually before my time, and increases since that we've authorized have been using the pre-existing scale and then increasing it by some amount.
Okay.
So we took 50 to 75, or we took 75 to 95. It never was a flat dollar amount.
Okay.
I think flat dollar amount on construction value is probably the easiest to administer. But again, I'm sensitive to, if any of you have not had the joy of doing a home renovation in the last couple of years, it's $200 a square foot now, that most contractors basically are in that neighborhood, $200 to $300 a square foot for renovation, let alone new build. So it is expensive to do any type of home improvement. We certainly don't want to discourage people who have the ability to do home improvement from doing it, because it's good for the condition of their house, which is good for the condition of the neighborhood, which is good for property values, et cetera, et cetera.
Nor do you want to discourage people seeking proper permitting by being cost prohibitive.
Correct. I will say that, having chatted with Tom and knowing a fair bit about some of the jobs he has had to check in on over the last few years, if we just think about his wages divided into, we'll use a round number, wages plus fringes, and we won't pick on Tom. If a code enforcement officer wages and fringes is somewhere in the $30 an hour cost to the village, $150 building permit means he's making 5 trips to the property. That is too many in some cases, and not enough in others for that dollar amount. So I don't know that there's an easy way to pick what's right. I'm sure we're too low at the high end. I don't know that we're wrong in the kind of, the median home value in the village of Trumansburg is somewhere around 190, 195.
So that's actually, I find a very interesting number, probably, because if we look at the $2 per thousand line, that's right about where it crosses over compared to our current residential. So I'm kind of trying to eyeball this, but at the $2 per thousand, when you talk about the $100,000 to $150,000 home, that'd be $300. Right now we're at $325, so that comes down $25. When you look at the $150 to $250 home, you're at $500 versus $425 right now. So that crossover is somewhere in that, $200,000 range, which you're saying is kind of our median, which is, I think, I don't know. I find that an interesting coincidence. But what it does mean is that as you go up, that's where I think you really start seeing the difference, right? So you're talking about, what's this? So like a million to 250 is $5,000 instead of 1275. When you talk about 10 million, now you're talking 40,000 versus 4,000. So you're really kind of, you start seeing it happen more at the higher level, and stuff under probably in the range of $1 million is spitting distance.
I'd almost want to, as I look at this, I'd almost want to consider and I haven't thought about this until the last 5 seconds. I don't know that I would want to decide on it tonight, but I'd almost want to consider a graduated flat dollar rate. So $4 or $5 per 1,000 from, 10 to 50,000 doesn't really change what's there very much. $5 per 1,000, or we'll use $4 per 1,000 with a $50 minimum. So the $20,000 project is actually lower. Your $50,000 project goes up by $25. I don't know that that's unfair to go from 175 to 200. But then when we get to the higher end for Tom's time, if the goal is to cover Tom's time, doesn't $2 per cover his time on a $20 million project? $40,000. There shouldn't be $40,000 worth of Tom's time per year, because these permits are only good for 1 year.
I see where you're going. I think that makes sense from kind of what's the gut feel? What does this kind of make sense? And yeah, if we're trying to back into kind of Tom's time, I'm also looking at, I like that Tom pointed out the kind of comparison to other municipalities. Everyone is at $3 per 1,000 and up, except for Cayuga Heights, which is at 1,000 per. Dollar. Sorry, let me say that again. Everyone's at $3 per 1,000 or higher, except for Cayuga Heights. That's at $1 per 1,000. I guess what I'm going to is based on that, and I don't have a lot of knowledge in this area, but I feel like $2 per 1,000 flat is not unreasonable. When you're talking about $1 million, $10-20 million, $40,000, it's right. The same percentage, right? As you're talking about a $1 million home and you're talking about $2,000. Like, it seems like it's a drop in the bucket at that point. I don't feel like, again, I don't have a lot of sense in here, but I feel like that seems reasonable from a construction. If you're talking about a $10 million construction, that's a big pot of money, to kind of put 40,000 in there. It seems big to us, but I don't think it seems big over the course of the whole project. So I see where you're coming from, but I almost feel like a $2 per 1,000 with like a basement of, $50 or something seems pretty reasonable. Kind of hits all the notes. It's doesn't make too much of a difference under, 250, but starts capturing some of those bigger projects.
I just want to throw in there that when you're talking, also to echo, Ben, what you're saying, that a big project is going to involve more than just Tom. It's going to be his support staff helping him get information. It's going to be, right, maybe more resources, maybe more binders, like all kinds of things go in with that. So I think we should say, yes, at this certain level, we're talking about Tom, but at a larger level, it's more than that. Or it's more legal questions for a guy at his rate. It's and that's a big.
It's going to be a lot of. It's going to be
consultation for boards when they need MRB to come look at a site plan review. That's where that number's going to.
Yeah, no, it's good. Yeah, right. It's going to be Dusty. It's going to be MRB. It's going to be other resources that Tom needs that are above and beyond what a normal house is going to require of him.
I think I agree with Ben on that. I mean, to me, it's a question of, do we move to 2 or 5 or somewhere in the middle? I don't, I mean, looking at 40,000 feels like a very large number, but I can't imagine a $20 million project. Not to say it's out of the realm of possibility, obviously, but I agree. To me, that's at least the $2 per thousand feels like it starts very low, right? Which I think capture those people who are probably not applying for permits when they really should be, you know, because the project is too small and that kind of thing. But then it does catch up. Certainly, to me, that looks like the right move. I mean, at no point in reviewing this before this meeting did I ever think, oh, those are too high. It was more, where do I fit in between 2 and 5, and, you know, does a 3 or something like that feel reasonable? But that's my thoughts.
I like all that sentiment, and I like 3. I feel like also being in keeping with the town of Ulysses makes a lot of sense.
So I've got an idea, but I won't be able to verbalize it till I plug it into a spreadsheet. So why don't, if it's okay with the board, why don't I do that? Do a side by side with an idea next to the existing, and then probably with the notion of having one fee for all building types, since we have one code enforcement officer, and not break it down by, you know, type of construction. And then send that around to the board over the next several days and see what you all think before we approve anything. And then whatever we settle on, we can approve in January.
I just updated that sheet with the 3 per thousand for whatever that's worth. And yeah, I agree with the only one type, especially because the numbers are within like $100 of each other.
Right.
It seems not worth the overhead and complexity.
Okay. Okay, then I will do that and then send it around. Anything else for new business? Then if not, we have some bills to pay. It is my intention, if there's no objection, it is my intention to add abstracts to the consent agenda in January. Vicky will have them ready by Wednesday of the week prior for everyone to review. And then if you have specific questions about a line item expenditure, you can just you can do a group email so that we can all see the question, so we don't ask the same question. But send the question directly to Vicky and she can answer it directly. That's not considered discussion. And then if there is a particular item of expenditure on a particular abstract that does require discussion, then we can just pull out that particular abstract, whether it's general water, sewer, or what have you. And the rest can remain in the consent agenda.
I don't see an abstract in the Dropbox.
Neither do I.
It'd be abstract 7. I just pulled it up.
It's in the Dropbox, is it?
Yeah.
It is. Oh, no, I don't know. Actually, hold on.
It's right under 6B.2.
I wonder if you're not syncing.
I don't know how to. I've never had a problem with that.
So if you just go to your search tool in the Dropbox, anybody who isn't finding it, and you type in abstract, you'll see the numbers, and then you can pull 7. Because that's not in my folder either.
Yeah. Would it be possible to email us real quick about that?
Sure.
I just dragged one in. See if you see it there, Ben.
I just emailed it to everybody too. Why would it, I mean,
See if you see it in the Dropbox, Ben.
Yep, just showed up for me.
I just resaved it.
All right, I also see it from Vicky.
So does everybody have an abstract available to review? Or if you
Yes.
haven't reviewed it already?
I will email it and not put it in the Dropbox just to make sure you guys do have it in case, because I've never had this happen before.
Yeah, I've noticed I've gotten a couple emails from Dropbox saying that syncing has been turned off because when it gets a little bit the Dropbox gets too big. And I don't know if you don't have a paid plan, that might be a problem. But I don't know. You might have one. I don't know. So
Okay, I'll just email it.
So the first abstract is our general fund abstract totaling $319,830.98. Would someone like to move to approve that?
Yeah, I'll move that we approve that.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Any questions or discussion? There is no questions, comments, discussion. Then all in favor of approving this abstract for that amount, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Right, our next abstract is our EMS billing abstract totaling $10,596.64.
Move that we approve that abstract.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Aye.
Next up, we have our water fund abstract totaling $40,752.89.
I move that we pay this abstract.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Any conversation, discussion, questions? Hearing none, then all in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Our sewer fund abstract totaling $45,905.70.
I move that we pay this abstract.
I'll second.
Motion in a second. I will point out we have a payment for the cleaning and televising of some of the sewer lines that took place a few months ago. Some of that work did lead directly to some very good information on where some of the inflow and infiltration is coming into the sewer lines. Any other comments or questions? If not, then all in favor of approving the sewer fund abstract, please say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Oh, aye. Sorry.
Last but not least is the trust and agency abstract totaling $39,514.21.
I move we pay trust and agencies.
Second.
Any discussion? Questions? Hearing none, then all in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay. We are at our second public comment period. I see Mark is still here. Mark, if there's anything you want to chime in with?
No, thanks.
Okay. Then I would entertain a motion to go into executive session to discuss a couple of personnel items.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Good night, everybody.
Aye.
All right, Mark, thanks. All right, let me end the recording.